Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Untangled Community Webinar. Today's topic will be on NG Firewall 14.2 and our zSeries appliances, which I think everybody will be excited about. My name is Steve Young, and I'm from the marketing team here at Untangled, and I'm going to be your host today. I have Dirk Morris, who is our founder and chief product officer with us, and he's going to be running you through the changes in the 14.2 as well as our zSeries appliances. If just a couple of housekeeping issues. If you don't hear any sound, please go to audio panel to select your preferences and to make sure that you have the correct settings. If you are using the telephone, you need to dial in and use the access code provided. Just as a quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so you have the option to rewatch it or to revisit it if you need to follow up on anything. We will be answering questions throughout the presentation, so please submit them through the question box on the GoToWebinar. You can always send questions to sales@untangled.com, and if we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we'll definitely be following up with you. And I'm just going to pass this over to Dirk to get us started.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks everybody for joining. Excited to show off some of the new features in 14.2 and talk about the zSeries appliances. So as usual, I'll just be walking through the changelog. If you guys have any questions at any point, please type them into the question box. I'll try to check it as frequently as possible to make sure I'm covering stuff and not missing anything. Unfortunately, I'm only working with one monitor today, so it'll be a little tougher. So have a little bit of patience. But with that said, I'm going to jump over out of the slideshow and go right to our wiki. And you can see this, correct, Steve?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So I'm going to jump here to the 14.2 changelog. So first thing, I'll walk through all of the major 14.2 changes. Obviously, there's tons of stuff that doesn't make it to the changelog, but most of the major features I'm going to review, give you a quick demo of some of them, and then talk about the zSeries. So before I jump into the features, actually, let me mention the 14.2 is available for download now on the Get Untangled free download link. Upgrades will be available in the coming weeks. So if you don't see your upgrade on your existing server and it's 14.1, 14.1, whatever, don't panic. That's totally normal. The way we roll these things out is we make them available to new installs first, and there's some reasons for doing that, which I'll cover in a few minutes. And then over time, we roll the upgrades out to the entire population. So don't panic if you don't have upgrades available today. That's not unexpected. You will in the coming weeks. So some major web filter changes. We focused a lot on some of the educational features. Untangled's used in a lot of educational environments, helping control what kids can and can't do in school environments and things like that. So we focused on some nice features that we think will really help there. One of the things is enforced safe search now includes YouTube. So let me go show you where that is. So if I go into apps, web filter, there was already a safe search setting, which basically when you toggle it on, it forces safe search mode in the different web query engines like Google and Bing and things like that. So this now includes YouTube. So you can enforce restricted mode on YouTube, safe search on YouTube, and things like that. We now actually log online searches in YouTube, so you can always have been able to record. Yes, I don't want to say those settings. It's always recorded search queries on Google and Bing and things like that, assuming you're doing SSL inspection. If you go under here under all query events, you can look at your searches that people are doing on your network. We don't do SSL inspection on your network, on this network, so there's not a lot showing up. But now YouTube searches will show up there as well. So if kids go there and type boobs or whatever, you will now see in the logs that they searched for whatever they searched for. There's a new search terms tab in the UI. This allows you to control the content of what's allowed to be searched for. And there's actually a couple links in the documentation that provide you some lists that you can import. So this is an ongoing issue in schools. So we may want to say, I don't want to I don't want to allow anything that looks for the word suicide. So you would just type that in here. You can block it. You could just choose to allow it and flag it, so it'll show up as flagged in your alerts or your reports. And if you do this, essentially that will block people from searching for the word suicide on any of the supported search engines, including YouTube now, Google, Bing, what are the other ones? Yahoo, I think, and a couple others. And it's intelligent about word boundaries, so you can, put in foo and it won't block foo bar, which is important because you typically would want to import a very large list here. And there's a couple ways you can import that are, this is unique to this import. You can not only import just the typical JSON, which is what's exported from another firewall. You can also import a big file that's just a CSV. And in the docs, there's a couple links to some sites that help schools to say, hey, here's some things you probably want to block or flag in your school setting. So you would go here to comma delimited or new line delimited, just one query term per line, or just the trivial JSON. So you can import those big lists and essentially enforce what people are searching for on your network and block it or flag it as desired. And covered all that. So hopefully that'll help in the school environments, really focused on, controlling what kids can and can't search for, and your reporting around such things that when they do search for things, you know about it. There's also a completely new categorization engine under the covers. And this is something we go through every now and then at Untangle. We're constantly evaluating technologies. So our job is to basically bring together the basic technologies into one central firewall product. And a lot of times that involves working with third parties. For example, virus blockers based on Bitdefender. This is the same for web filter categorization. Now we implement the whole web filter and all the logic, but the actual categorization of URLs is something we use third-party providers for, and there's lots of providers out there. So we're always testing and looking for the best solutions on the market. We've been using our old solution for quite a while, but there have been better ones and changes. So part of staying current is changing out the technologies under the covers. It'll be mostly invisible to you, but one of the ways it is visible is that the categories names are actually different. And when you upgrade, it will convert your old settings to your new settings. They're pretty similar, but they do have slightly different names. So just be aware that when you update, if it's a little bit different, don't panic, that's totally normal. It'll convert one by one all your old settings to your new settings, and they'll be pretty much equivalent. One of the things you will notice is that visually this is now grouped by a group over here. So we changed the way this is displayed to make it a little more easy to deal with a huge list, which, by the way, you can actually group by all sorts of fields. You could always, but if you just want to group by what's blocked, you can choose group by that column. But for now, we changed the UI to be grouped by group, just to make it a little easier to look through. And the default settings are pretty similar to what they used to be. Most of the malicious sites are blocked by default. Let me look at questions real quick. Well, I go over the upgrade version. To upgrade to the newest version, you go to config, you go to upgrade, and then you click on upgrade. This one is already current, so there's no upgrades available. There'll be an upgrade button here. You don't need to pay us anything. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to reinstall. Your upgrades may not be available yet, though. So if you go in here and see no upgrades available and you're on 14.1, don't panic. That's totally normal. The rollout goes to the entire population over time. So it's not unexpected if you won't see upgrades. But when upgrades are available to your server, you can go here and upgrade without doing anything. And the upgrade is fairly quick this time. There's no reboot, there's no new kernel, there's nothing like that. So let me see. Other quality of life improvements, I talked about that. We just changed the way it's rendered, and a couple other UI improvements. All right, let me move on to intrusion prevention real quick. Intrusion prevention actually had a lot of fixes. It had a completely new implementation of intrusion prevention in the previous version, 14.1. So we took a lot of that feedback and incorporated it, and also fixed a lot of bugs. The major new features are a couple of new features. One is the ability to whitelist certain servers or IPs. So let me show you how this works. Just give you a quick demonstration of how I would go about doing this. So a quick overview of the way intrusion prevention works. Intrusion prevention has a ton of signatures. Signatures you can view on the signatures tab and clicking on any, and these are continuously updated from upstream. And maintaining those signatures is a big headache. So essentially the way you do it, hopefully make it a lot easier, is we have rules that determine which signatures get enabled or disabled or what status they might be. And these rules generally, most people have them in the defaults, but you can go in here and say, I want these rules turned on, these rules turned off. And then what happens is when those signatures are updated upstream, the rules are rerun and the signatures are enabled, the new signatures are enabled as needed or disabled as needed, and so on. So for the most part, what you do is configure your rules determine what signatures are enabled in what state, and then it's hands off from there. And the signatures will continue to update and the rules will run and determine what signatures are on and off. So what we were seeing is people wanted a lot of things like, I want to know when there's a port scan going on, but it keeps alerting me that one of my servers, which is very active, is doing a port scan, and I don't want to know about that because that's expected. I know about that server. I want to essentially pass that server. So now you have an ability to do that. The way it's done is, let's say you would go in here and you would add a variable, trusted server 1.2.3.4, and by the way, you can define multiple ones. You could use CIDR, so you can define whole subnets and things like that. So let me define trusted server, and then you would go back to rules, and then you create a new rule. And what this essentially is going to do is we're going to use a new action called whitelist. You're not going to do this. So 1.2.3.4. This has no effect. Let me explain why. Rules determine which signatures are enabled. So this would essentially act on a signature with source address 1234, not the traffic of source address 1234. This determines, again, what signatures. So if I want to whitelist this server from all signatures, I'm just going to leave that section blank because there are no conditions. And then I would say whitelist, and I would go down here and say trusted server. So if I click done, essentially what that's going to do, actually I need to move that rule to the top because we want it to act first thing. When evaluating the signatures, essentially what it's going to do is whitelist that trusted server as I defined back in this tab for, in this case, all the rules because there were no conditions, but I could define a certain class type or things like that. If I only wanted to whitelist it from certain signatures. And I may want to actually go in here and say whitelist it packets to that network as well. You may not want that because you may want to know about port scans to that server. But if you do want that, this is how you would do it. And then I would have two rules. And these two rules would essentially whitelist all packets to and from that server, from all signatures in this case. If you only want to do certain signatures, you would define that in the conditions. So that's an easy way to, without basically turning off all scanning of traffic to and from that network, to whitelist that specific IP or subnet or whatever from the signatures that you don't want to know about. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit more granularity and tuning IPS and reducing some of those false positives or things that you just don't care about.
Hey, Dirk, we have a question. Do you have standard rules to protect a network intrusion or something that would update the rules like that files on antivirus?
Our suggested rule are the default rules, which basically are going to, based on how much memory you have in the system, turn on the rules that we suggest. So our suggestion is default settings, which is true in almost all cases of all apps. And you can go in here and tune it if you want to be more aggressive or less noisy or more noisy to your heart's content. All right, let me look at the questions real quick. It looks like we have a couple people online that have been answering most of the questions. And yes, for those who are asking, it is the Bright Cloud from WebRoot web categorization engine that we are using under the covers. And to be blunt, it was of the ones that we tested the best currently categorization, most in terms of efficacy and accuracy, as well as performance. And additionally, there were some other benefits that will be in future versions. There's other great benefits to the API, more metadata that's available to us about reputation systems and IPs and certs that we are using in future products as well. So obviously we don't have that stuff to demo to you today. We're pretty excited to be using this new provider as it gives us some great new technology to pass on to you in future versions. All right, I think that was all the whitelisting. I will talk a little bit about what we call the post-routing option. There's a new option on the status page about when you want to IPS to scan traffic. Without going into too much of a history lesson, if you mouse over it, it gives you a quick description. Before network processing means it's going to scan basically everything. That's the current default. So you're going to see a lot of stuff. If you throw it on a network with a public IP, probably going to see a lot of stuff logged by intrusion prevention. The difference between that and after network processing is after network processing means basically after NAT takes place. And in most environments, you've got a public IP and then you've got a private internal network. Most traffic that's inbound isn't going to pass unless you've got a port forward. So in most cases, there's a huge difference between before and after, because after network processing scans a whole lot less traffic. So why would you want to do this? Before network processing, the benefits are it's literally scanning everything, even packets that are immediately going to be dropped right after scanning them, because there's no port forward rule. You know, there's some port scan or SSH attempt coming in on my public IP. It's going to be dropped, but IPS scans it anyway and alerts you saying, hey, this was found. So if you want the most accurate data and the most data, you want to scan before network processing. The problem with this is obviously it's really, really noisy because you're constantly being pinged and probed if you have a public IP. It's not necessarily very interesting. And what tends to happen is people tend to ignore the logs because you see 10,000 quote attacks a day and it's completely accurate. It's just not very noteworthy or interesting. So for those people who only really care about stuff that maybe they should know about, a better option might be after network processing, which basically means scan stuff that actually is going to get passed. So I'm only worried about traffic that may actually reach my servers. In this case, you'll end up getting a lot less, which for people who only want to know what to worry about, maybe this is a better option. You're going to see a lot less in the reports and a lot less to worry about, and comb through it a little bit easier. So there's pros and cons. You know, how much data do you really want at the end of the day? This used to be, for the people who've been using Untangled for a long time, after network processing was our default for many years. That's not the default today, because we know this makes a lot of people very nervous because they install it and they say, it's not scanning stuff. I'm not seeing anything in my reports. And when I had something else installed, it was flagging tons of stuff. It's clearly broken. So our thinking was, well, we only want to alert you about stuff that's important. That's not the anticipated behavior by most users, though. So we've kept the default now for before network processing. But if you want to switch back to the old mode where you're only scanning stuff that actually passes, you now have that capability to do so. It has some other benefits too of kicking in after bypass rules and things like that. So bypass rules work a little bit better with IPS and things like that. So, you know, it's up to you which one you want to use. And in this, hopefully there's a more detailed explanation here in the wiki about which one might be right for you. Oh, and then one of the nice things that we added in reports is it will now link back when a signature fires on a packet saying, hey, this matches the signature, and it goes into reports. It will now link back to tell you what rule enabled that signature. So if you're having problems with a lot of false positives or something, this will make it a little bit easier to track back. Or if you just want to know, hey, you know, I want to tune this rule or turn that rule off for now or things like that. In reports now, it will show you which rule was responsible for enabling that signature, which logged that packet. Let me look. There was a question about bridge mode and processing before or after. In bridge mode, it's not going to be a huge difference because in most cases, when you're bridging, before and after is going to be similar, much more similar than a router scenario where you've got NAT blocking almost everything inbound. There are, of course, differences. For example, if the firewall or filter rules blocked it, then there would be a difference. But in that case, it's a little less impactful than, say, a router scenario where there's going to be a huge difference between before and after. Thanks for asking that question. All right, I'm going to move on. A lot to cover. I don't want to keep on track here. Directory connector has been improved. There's now directions to connect to Microsoft Azure. There's directions in the documentation. The reason we did this is obviously because a lot of shifting of directory services up to the cloud. So it's very important. We think that a lot of organizations will eventually be having directory services in the cloud, not in their on-premises Active Directory server. So we want to get ahead of that trend and have Directory Connector connect to directories up in Microsoft Azure for those people who go that direction. We also changed the login monitor for those of you who are using the login monitor on your Active Directory server. The login monitor is a little agent that runs on your Active Directory server that basically tells Untangle, so-and-so just logged into this machine, so that Untangle knows which user's on which machine, which basically means, if you go here to your host table, they're on zSeries, yes, I want to continue. If you go to your host table, you might see usernames for all your hosts, like this one. My Active Directory server might say, hey, I know that D. Morris is logged into this IP. And then the username would be displayed here. That's what the Active Directory login monitor does. And now it also monitors radius authentication events. So if you're using some other agents, or there's all sorts of different authentication events that happen against your Active Directory server, the login monitor now monitors those. So you can do things like Wi-Fi and things like that. And now Untangle can consume those because the login monitor will send those events to Untangle. Just reviewing the questions real quick, making sure I've covered everything. A couple other nice fixes. There were a lot of issues. A lot of people had issues with systemd. We switched to systemd as most Linux distributions did a couple of years ago. We've, it's been a lot of changes. Let's just say there's been some growing pains. One of which was there were certain cases where it would be very slow to boot, upwards of 5 minutes in some cases, and then it would time out and continue to boot as normal. Hopefully all those issues have been resolved in 14.2. There's been a whole bunch of IPS fixes, as I referenced earlier. Thanks for all your feedback for those people playing with the new IPS in 14.1. There's been lots of improvements, both in performance and the way we query users and groups and things like that from the Active Directory server. That's used, again, to predict the username, but also what group a user is in, because a lot of people have policies by group. I want teachers to get this policy and students to get that policy and things like that. So hopefully that works more efficiently. The OpenVPN version included in the OpenVPN app, that's the one that's built for Windows, has now been updated to 2.4.7. Thank you to Webfool for doing that. He's one of our community contributors, and he stays on top of updating the OpenVPN exe that gets basically built on the user's behalf with their cert and all that in the OpenVPN app. There's a couple nice features. Now you can schedule the time configuration backup. Configuration backup just does an automatic backup every day. So now you can schedule the time that happens, and that backs up to our command center, which you can go back and browse through your old backups of all your old settings and restore them as needed. And then ability to hide broadcasting of SSID for those using Wi-Fi in your Untangle. You can now turn that off and say, I want my SSID not to be broadcast, which basically means you can still connect to it. You just have to know the SSID. So for those people who want to have a more silent Wi-Fi network, you can tick that, and then people have to know the SSID and type it in manually to connect to the network. All right, any other questions? Hopefully I covered most of the major stuff. As I said, there's tons of other changes when you get in and play with it. Actually, I will mention one other thing. A popular request we had from users was the ability to search in some of these settings. So we've added that in addition to the grouping and things, so I can type and quickly find any setting that may have that word in it. And of course, if I hit save, it's not going to nuke all my other settings that aren't shown. They're just not being shown. And actually the same is true in application control and things like that. So hopefully that will make managing those large lists a little bit easier. Same in here. So that now works in web filter as well as application control, a couple other places. All right, I think that wraps it up for the major 14.2 changes. I was going to walk on to the appliances and show you a bit of information about our new appliances, which are pretty excited. Been a long time in the works. And you can view these appliances under Products, Appliances. So before I jump into each individual appliance, the focus behind coming out with new appliances were really a couple things. We wanted fast appliances, so we want to stay on top of the latest and greatest. So these do have the latest and greatest technology. So that's for speed and stability, but also price. We wanted to continue to offer inexpensive appliances. So on this new line are going to be faster and less expensive than the old line. And we've also changed the naming scheme quite a bit. It used to be, U25, U50, which basically the 50 meant more or less roughly how many users it was meant for. We've tried to get away from that because that's not really a perfect estimate. So now we've gone with Z4 because there are 4 ports on the back, and Z4W, which means 4 ports with wireless, and Z20. Now we're still trying to be upfront about how many users it's meant for. So if I go and click on more info, and in fact some of these it says right here. But really at the end of the day, it depends more on your configuration than the horsepower. So if you want to do SSL inspection on 1,000 users, well, you need a lot more than if you're just going to run web filter on 1,000 users. It also depends on what kind of users do you have. How active are they really? Networks vary a wild amount just when looking at A versus B with the same number of devices. So we tried to move away from that naming scheme just to make it clear that that's not a certainty. And we've also, on the hardware side, if you go down here, you can go on these and get a 360 view of these appliances, which is nice. And also the tech specs are here. Some of the things I'll mention is we've upped a lot of the memory, and also we've switched a lot of the storage to be faster. So on the low end, we use MSATA SSDs now. And on the mid-size and higher appliances, we actually have gone to NVMe, which is extremely fast storage SSDs. And a large amount of RAM, as you can see. And again, 360 works here as well. And these are all 1 use from the mid-size and higher. No more 4 U's or 2 U's or anything like that. So very fast machines, very solid. Also on the high end, the very high end, we now have the ability to support fiber. Let me click on the Z12 here. And you see some fiber ports right here. So you've got your typical Ethernet and fiber if you guys have fiber. And also the LCD with all the status displays and things like that. So we're really excited to have these out. They're extremely fast and inexpensive. And there is a coupon right now, isn't there, Steve, that if you buy an appliance, if you buy an unlimited for that appliance, there's a discount. Let me see. Let me switch back to the slides.
It's 25% off promotion right now for any unlimited package for our zSeries appliances. So that's even on the Z4, if you buy the unlimited, you can get 25% off.
And the way these packages work with our appliances is if you're just downloading software, you basically say, well, I have, I'm running my own hardware, so I'm buying an up to 50 license. if you're buying our hardware, some users don't want to worry about how many devices are on their network. They just want to buy the right size appliance and just not worry about licensing. So you can actually buy unlimited packages specifically for these appliances. And that means you don't have to worry about how many devices or users or whatever on your network. So you can buy a Z5 and then buy a specific, up to 50 or up to 100. Or you can just say, you know what, I'm going with the unlimited. I don't want to worry about it. It's only slightly more expensive. And actually with this discount, it's probably quite inexpensive. So if that sounds appealing to you, I would look into that. Because with this new appliances being very fast and inexpensive and the unlimited being discounted, it's probably an easy way to get into the market quite cheaply. There was a question about wireless. Our focus is mostly on being a firewall. And the wireless for the Z4W, our focus in the Z4W is not to be the best Wi-Fi performance in the world, is to be stable and operating. So if it's a very small office and you just want to have one box and not worry about it, this would be good Wi-Fi. If you're a college campus and you want a Wi-Fi mesh solution, this is probably not going to be the best solution for you. This is not AC. I think it is 2.4 only, I believe. It can do 5 megahertz, but I think only as a client. So it's not AC. So if you're just looking for simple Wi-Fi for small office, it's going to be fine. Our focus is on it being performant and stable. But it's not top of the line in terms of, if you want to mesh Wi-Fi across your whole campus, that's probably not the best solution for you. What most of our users do is, they run us at the gateway. And larger sites obviously have dedicated Wi-Fi systems within their internal network, usually mesh or many access points. And those are installed separately from the actual gateway firewall device. All right, any more questions and answer? If you have a question, please type it in the chat box. I know a lot of our team has been answering a lot of questions, but we still have a minute or two here. Let me make sure I covered everything. And again, for those of you who missed the beginning, 14.2 updates will be rolling in the coming weeks. So if you don't see the update, don't panic. You can, of course, download the new version, install it, move your settings over. That's completely not required, though. You will be able to update with just a touch of a button. It's a very quick update this time around. It's just not going to be available to everybody quite yet.
Last call on questions before we wrap up.
All right, I'll hand it back over to you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Always contact us, sales@untangled.com, support@untangled.com. Jump on our forums. We'd love to hear feedback. Any more questions you have that we didn't cover, we apologize for that, but we'll be here all day, so let us know if you have more.
Yeah, a couple of questions just came in. We'll follow up after the webinar and answer those via email. All right. Thank you, guys.
Everybody, for joining.
Thank you, everyone, and this concludes our webinar. Thank you.